couple of different times over the past week or so about how to know when you're coming back from an injury if you're ready to start running again. And I think the obvious answer, of course, for me as a professional would be to say, like, you know, you should ask your doctor or ask your PT for clearance. Make sure you're going through the proper testing, and hopefully that, you know, in physical therapy, that you're not only doing the proper testing, but that you're going through some running drills and being observed by a professional to make sure everything looks good and that you're cleared and good to go. That being said, if you don't have access to those things sometimes, or maybe you had a small injury, like you just tweaked something or sprained something and you didn't really see a doctor or go to PT, but you're wondering if you can go back to running because you don't want to make it worse again, but you're starting to feel good doing everything else and you think you're ready to go. So while I'm not going to give specific medical advice, and I'm not even going to talk about any specific injury or condition, I did want to let you guys know some of the things that I look for when I'm working with clients to make sure that they are ready to run. And this is just going to be some of the stuff that I would look for if I was assessing their readiness to go back to run, right? So there's no specific exercises or drills here, but I will create another video for you guys with those things, so be on the lookout for that. Kind of where I just go through some strength drills that are good for runners in general, good for you if you're starting to run or returning to run, to make sure you have that full body strength, mobility, and stability that can help you feel good and feel strong running, help you up your mileage if that's what you're looking for, and also potentially help you prevent injuries down the road. So a couple of things I want to make you aware of as you're going through the next piece of this video with me is that we are looking mostly at lower extremity in this video, and we can get into core stability in another video. But basically, you know, regardless of if your injury is acute or chronic, or if it happens a long time ago and you never really dealt with it and running is new for you, and regardless of whether it's foot, ankle, knee, hip, shin splints, whatever the case might be, right? We are kind of going through an assessment from bottom to top. So we're looking at foot first and then going up all the way through some jumping activities. And we're not going to move on to one unless the one before that looks good and feels good, right? So if you're going through this little assessment yourself and doing a check-in, don't push yourself to go to the jumpy stuff if you are struggling with maybe your single leg balance or your calf raises. A couple other things you're going to hear me say in the video. One thing is going to be that I mentioned eccentric strength. Eccentric is just the lengthening phase of the muscle as opposed to the shortening phase. So the easiest way to describe it, I think, is if you were thinking about a bicep curl, as you curl up, this is your concentric phase, the muscle is shortening, and as you start to lower down, this would be the eccentric phase as the bicep muscle is lengthening. So sometimes you'll see people training where, you know, they do a quick upward motion and then they take 5 seconds or 10 seconds to lower down, or sometimes you'll see people doing negatives where they use both arms to bring something up and then they take it down with just the one arm. So that is eccentric strength. It's important in running because especially if you're doing trail running or downhill running, we really need eccentric strength from the calves, and we need a lot of control over the mobility in the ankle. So you'll hear me mention that. Also keeping in mind that regardless of where your injury is, knowing that it could have affected things up and down the kinetic chain, right? So you might have had a foot or an ankle injury, but when you go through this assessment, it's actually a bit of hip weakness that shows up. And that's okay. Know that that is completely normal. But again, that's something that you want to do strength work for so that your body can move in the best way, the strongest way when you get back to running. So even if you don't have pain, but you're noting some weakness or you're struggling with something, or one of the things that I say I'm looking for, right? Maybe I'll say like, oh, if your hip sneaks back or your hip pops out, if you find any of those things are happening with you, then you want to dial back and maybe do a little bit of targeted strength training to make sure that that doesn't become a problem for you down the road, right? Because it might feel fine as you're doing a drill, an exercise, or an assessment a few times, but remember how many steps you're taking and running, right? So what happens is you end up repeating that motion over and over and over again. When we repeat a cycle like that over and over and over again, number one, we're just drilling down on poor mechanics. We could be setting ourselves up for an injury down the road, but we're also not using our body as efficiently as possible. So as you're trying to add on distance, add on reps, or, you know, increase your training, those things could become more of a problem. So if I was working with you and you're a runner, you know, I wouldn't necessarily change your stride if everything is working for you, but if I do see some weak points, I'm going to want to make sure to strengthen those, because they're only going to make your stride stronger and more efficient. So one of my first questions would be is, can you maintain single leg stance or single leg balance for at least 30 seconds on each side? So the injured side or the weaker side might not necessarily feel exactly the same as your stronger side or your uninjured side, but you do want to make sure that you can maintain that single leg balance without having to compensate anywhere. So knowing that single leg balance means foot, ankle, knee, hip, core all have to work. What I'm going to look for is the ability to kind of pick this one leg up, and I'm balancing on this side here, and I'm making sure that there's no compensation that's going to put the hip or the knee at an unhealthy angle. So what we see sometimes when the hip is weak after an ankle or a knee injury is we'll see something that is called a Trendelenburg sign, which means that your hip drops out like this in a single leg stance. So you want the ability to, if that does happen right away, to be able to pull everything up and in so that you've got shoulder, hip, knee, and ankle stacked. The other thing that I'm looking for is for the foot and ankle to be kind of, I talk about it a lot, that footprint in the sand kind of look, where the ankle bone, right, this, your medial malleolus, that it's not going to drop in and collapse your arch here, and you can see how that changes all my alignment, and also that the ankle isn't rolling out to the side, right? So making sure that you're not hanging out on that outer edge of your foot. Now, as you're trying to get your balance, especially after an injury, the foot might rock back and forth, the hip or knee might go in and out, but what you're looking for is that ability to control, bring it back to center, and be able to balance here for that 30-second mark, and then try it again on the other side. And the reason that we're looking for that is because in running, if you were to slow it down, you have to think that every time you take your stride forward, in that moment, if we were to like freeze frame it, you're actually having this little tiny single leg balance. And it's the same in walking, right? So as this leg is transitioning through, we do have a single leg balance happening on this one, no matter for how short of a time. So then thinking about how many steps you take when you're out on your run or out on your walk, we want to make sure that single leg balance is a really good foundation before we even go any further. Okay, so another thing that I want to check in on is your ability to utilize your calf muscles when you're running. So what we want to see, and I'll show you the progressions, but you definitely want to be able to do a traditional calf raise as well as a single leg calf raise. Right, so this is just going up on your toes. I'm going to actually use my bookshelf here to be able to put my hand on so that I can work on the strength and my range of motion rather than just working on the balance, right? And you can also do it freehand and work on your balance while you're doing these calf raises. I'm going to spin around so you can see what I'm looking for, but basically you can either put one hand here or two hands at like a tabletop or a countertop. And what I'm going to look for in the double leg is just how high I can get. And I want to think about my head being drawn up by a string. So again, what I'm looking for is to not slide forward towards the bookshelf and use momentum to pull me into the motion, right? So from the side, again, I am just trying to lift up and thinking about being straight up and down, still shoulders stacked over hips here. And my core is working, my quads are working, my glutes are working, and of course my calves and my feet, right? So a lot of other muscles that maybe you don't traditionally think about in a calf raise, and you're just making sure that you don't do this to go forward, which is what I see a lot. The other thing that I see a lot is people kind of either dropping in on the big toe or that the ankles roll out and there's more weight on your pinky toe. So just like in the single leg balancing, right? So we want to make sure that we've got the weight distributed across the 5 toes, and then we are putting weight into the balls of the feet, squeezing glutes, quads, core, lifting straight up in the air. So that's your double leg calf raise. There's also a single leg, right, where we take one leg away. And we're trying to do the same thing and see how that feels. It's going to be a little bit harder. And then my favorite version is actually where you go up with both legs and down slowly with just the one. Okay, and that works things a little bit differently. So I'm gonna spin again so you can see what I'm doing. And sometimes this is a tough one to get. But you are going to do your calf raise just like normal. And then once you get to the top, you're actually going to take one leg away and then you're going to return just on the single leg. And then we repeat maybe for 10, 12, or 15 reps in a row on one side. And then we will switch to the other side here. And if you really want to work your range of motion, you can do this exact same thing maybe on a step. You can even do it off the edge of like a curb or on your stoop. Then you're going to get that range of motion that's actually below the floor, right? So if I was going to demonstrate it to you, let's say I was to take a stack of books here. And I'm going to work from this height and actually let my heels drop off. So I'm almost getting a little calf stretch and then come all the way up. And then come all the way back down again. So my muscles have to work through a bigger range of motion. And again, you can also do this with the eccentric version or with the single leg calf raise. Legs, I also want to see that you have good range of motion in your ankle going in the opposite direction. So we've thought about this direction here. This is called plantar flexion of your ankle. And then we're going to look at dorsiflexion of your ankle. And that means that you're able to kind of lift here. So I'm going to look to make sure that kind of both ankles have a similar range of motion. Again, you can use something to put your hand on so you're not losing balance and focusing on that instead of on the strength and range of motion in the front. And so you're just going to, rather than thinking about lifting your toes up off the ground, which kind of looks more like this, like a tiny lift, you're going to think about lifting the whole front of your foot off the ground and lowering back down slowly. And you can see what happens if I lose my balance is that my upper body is going to rock. And what I see people do a lot is when they go to lift up the front part of their foot, they'll kind of cheat by sticking their butt out behind them. So it kind of looks like that. And it's like, oh, look how far I got off the ground. But that range of motion is coming from up here instead of down at the ankle. So we want to see shoulders over hips. You're going to hear me say that a lot. Glutes are firing, quads are firing. And then you're able to put your weight in your heel. So there's going to be the slight rock of your weight in your heel, but you can see them still stacked. And then just lifting the front part of the foot as much as you can, again, without rolling to the inner or outer edge of the heel. And slowly lowering down with control. Now, if either of those two moves are too difficult for you in standing, then I would definitely say you're not ready to get back to running yet. But what you can do if they're hard, if they cause pain, or if you really notice a significant difference in the range of motion from one side to the other, and that could be an ankle range of motion, or what it could be is maybe you feel like you can't fully straighten the knee when you're doing this, right? Like it's hard to fire your quad and you're doing your calf raise and it's kind of always a bent knee. If that feels too difficult, you can always start working on building strength here. You can do it in a seated position, just all the way up. You can hold for an isometric contraction and then slowly lower down and see does one heel tend to drop faster than the other? Can one not get up as high? And then you can do the same thing this way, which should not be as challenging, but it is a good way to build strength in this motion, and then you can take it back up to standing. Okay, so another thing I want to see you be able to do is just the ability to move in and out of a squat and to be able to hold a squat with hips, knees, and ankles in alignment, not feeling like, again, like you're losing your balance or one side is doing something different, right? So just a very, very traditional squat, body weight squat to be able to kind of come down like this and then come back up. And I'm looking to make sure, one hip isn't driving back behind you. I'm also gonna look to make sure that the knees don't dip in or dip out, right? So I'm really looking for the stacking and also to make sure that you're not drifting forward. I'll show you from the side. That knees are not drifting forward. That's putting a lot of stress on your ankles. It is putting stress on your knees, and it's not so great for core and low back. So again, I'm just looking for the simple body weight squat, checking in on mechanics here. Just making sure we're not setting ourselves up for another problem. This is a good indicator telling me, you know, maybe there's not enough range of motion in the ankles, there's something still going on with the knee, something still going on with the hip. Maybe your body is not wanting to put 50-50 weight on each side, and in running we're going to ask it to put 100% of your weight on one leg, so we want to make sure that it can move with that 50-50 weight distribution in your squat, and again that your core is firing correctly, right? And it's not that the squat is used in running, but it is a good way to assess all the muscle groups that we're going to need. So if we see a problem here, we know we want to do more strengthening before we put you back up to running. So I also would want to see if you were able to do a walking lunge. So we've got a million different types of lunges, right? If you work out, you know, there's so many different styles. But what I'm looking for in the walking lunge is the ability to balance, support, stabilize over one leg while you're moving the other leg, and that we're not going to have any crazy like compensatory patterns, right? And I'm not saying you have to have perfect balance with every rep, but the ability to right yourself without pain or real difficulty is what I'm going to be looking for. So a walking lunge, basically, we're just going to, you know, start at one end of the room or the track or whatever you're working on here, and we're going to take that one leg up. We're going to exaggerate, right? So again, here we've got single leg balance, and then we're just stepping forward into the lunge here. And what I'm going to look for is that when you step forward, that there's not this huge translation here of my shoulders going back while my leg reaches forward, right? So I'm going to be here, my momentum is going forward, I'm landing in my lunge position, okay, about 90 degrees between the angle here, but it might be a little bit higher if this is your first time doing these. You might land in like a perfect 90-90 where your knee almost touches the floor. But again, I'm just looking for the ability for your shoulders to stack over your hips as you move through. And then you're gonna come up and out of the lunge, and the other foot is going to replace this one. So you're coming up through your single leg balance again, and then landing here, right? So you can see again, as I translate that movement, there's no excessive use of my torso. My core is more stabilizing than doing anything else. Okay, so if all of those things are looking and feeling good, then I also want to test out your ability to jump off of and land on each leg individually. So we can start with doing some normal jumping tests that involve both legs. That's the easier way to absorb impact, obviously, if you have both sides working at the same time. But what can happen then is that you might get more of a weight shift towards the uninjured or unaffected side, right? And that's your body's way of trying to protect itself. So we can just, you know, making sure that you're feeling good with these little jumps, that nothing weird is going on, right? Sometimes we see people's knees come in when they're jumping or in when they're landing. So again, if something like that happens when it's double leg, we are going to take some steps back, not necessarily to say you can't run if that's happening, but we definitely want to look at strengthening some other muscle groups before we go back into running or other sports. So we can look at these kind of jumps and see how you feel, and if everything feels good, right, if the injured body part feels good, nothing else feels wonky, your form looks kind of good, then we're going to look at single leg jumps. And so what I want to see is your ability to jump and land on this one leg, right? And you might lose your balance, you might kind of land on the inside of your foot, you might land on the outside of your foot. So knowing that it's not going to be perfect every time, but making sure that you can do this without pain, and that there's not a significant difference in height, in strength, and in the way that you're landing from both sides, right? So these little hops in place, if those feel good, then you can move towards hops that have some momentum where you're changing direction, right? So you can start with a little single leg forward hop, see how you land there. Okay. And then once you feel good about all of those, another thing that I really like to do is just testing your ability to jump off of both legs and land on just one. And that's for a similar reason to the eccentric calf raises. We just know you're gonna get more height if you jump off of both legs, right, for the average person. And so then your ability to absorb the shock and have a good landing on just the one leg when you're coming down from that bigger height is important, right? So you can see, obviously, you guys watched me jump off the one leg, right? So you can see the height that I get there, as opposed to jumping off both legs. I'm gonna get a lot higher, and I have to land softly still. And then if I take that up a notch, then I can jump off both, landing on one. So again, not gonna be perfect the first time. You might feel like you lose your balance, you might feel like you have a heavy landing, and then it's just practicing to see, can you catch yourself, can you land a bit softer, does everything still feel good? Okay, so that is it for today, guys. Let me know what you thought of this. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will hit you back with a strength video for runners sometime soon.